What if the greatest love story of your life began with a mistake? What if walking into the wrong building, holding a coffee-stained resume and a heart full of quiet hope, wasn't a failure but the beginning of everything Elena Brooks never planned on rewiring Caleb Whitmore's world? And Caleb, he never expected the girl with messy hair and a stubborn smile to be the one who tore down the walls he had spent years building, and yet, here they were. Standing under a sky full of stars, hands trembling but sure, whispering vows that weren't just promises, they were survival. They were beginnings. "I want to build something quiet with you," he had whispered once, in the dark of an elevator, in the flicker of broken lights and broken hearts, learning to trust again. This is not a story of perfect people. This is a story of scars, of laughter, of sticky notes and stormy nights, and two souls learning that love isn't about fixing what's broken, it's about staying anyway. If you're ready to believe in second chances, in messy beginnings, in love that heals in the quiet, then come with us. Hit like, share, and subscribe, because sometimes the best stories are the ones that weren't planned at all. Let's begin. They say one wrong turn can change everything. For Elena Brooks, it wasn't just a turn. It was a breathless, blistered stumble into a building she was never meant to enter and a life she never dared to imagine. She had $27 in her account, a resume stained with too much hope and not enough experience, and a heart so frayed it barely beat with certainty anymore. The heat that afternoon pressed down like a punishment, the kind of heat that melted ambition into regret on the sidewalks of New York. Her shoes bit into her heels with every step. Sweat trickled under her stiff blazer. Still, she clung to the address crumpled in her hand, a part-time interview at Pinewood Printing. Small place, small paycheck, a chance to stay afloat for one more month. She whispered to herself like a prayer, just get through today. Just one more breath, one more shot. When Elena reached the address, she stopped dead. Above her rose a skyscraper, all shimmering glass and cold steel. An endless stretch of windows gleaming under the sun. Across the top, a name in gold letters, Whitmore Global. This wasn't a print shop. This was something else entirely. Corporate, unreachable, not built for girls with cheap shoes and cheaper dreams. But hope, foolish, desperate hope has a way of pushing you forward. She wiped her hands on her skirt, swallowed hard, and stepped through the revolving doors. Inside, the world shifted, marble floors stretched toward infinity. The air smelled of money and ambition, not ink or paper. People moved like currents, sharp suits, faster steps, practiced smiles. Elena hesitated, just long enough for a woman at the reception desk to lift a perfectly arched eyebrow. "Name?" she asked. The word fell heavy between them. Elena cleared her throat. "Elena Brooks. I'm here for an interview." The receptionist barely blinked. With the grace of someone who had seen 1,000 mistakes before breakfast, she slid a visitor badge across the counter. 19th floor, room 5B. The elevator doors closed around Elena like a verdict. She stood stiffly between men and women who smelled like success, wearing shoes that didn't hurt and faces that didn't doubt. She stared at her reflection in the polished walls, wrinkled skirt, nervous hands, wide, uncertain eyes. She looked like a girl who didn't belong. She prayed no one else would notice. On the 19th floor, a woman led her through a maze of glass corridors into a stark, gleaming conference room. Elena perched on the edge of a chair, her hands twisting in her lap. She was about to turn around to escape when the door opened. He walked in like the world had been built to make space for him. Caleb Whitmore, sharp suit, sharper eyes, the kind of presence that made a room hold its breath without knowing why. He didn't look at her as he sat across the table, focused on his tablet. "Name?" he asked. his voice low and effortless. Elena Brooks. She managed, almost too soft to hear. At the sound of her voice, he finally looked up. Steel blue eyes met hers. And for a second, only a second, the air in the room felt thinner. He frowned slightly. Pinewood Printing, he asked. Elena flushed, forcing a smile she didn't feel. Yes, she said brightly, trying to salvage the moment. I'm really good at calming temperamental printers, and I make an excellent cup of coffee. With, enthusiasm. The silence stretched taut between them. A different girl might have crumbled. Elena just kept smiling, the kind of smile you learn after life has knocked you down a few too many times. Caleb finally set his tablet down. Miss Brooks, he said, almost gently. Pinewood Printing is 2 buildings down, past the pharmacy. This is Whitmore Global. It hit her all at once. The wrong building, the wrong floor, the wrong life. Elena wanted to disappear, to melt into the pristine marble floors and pretend she'd never existed. But instead, she laughed, soft and helpless and real. I guess, she said, shrugging. That's what happens when you believe in miracles. And don't double-check street numbers. For a long moment, Caleb simply stared at her. Then, in a tiny crack of something that might have been amusement, he smiled. It was small, barely there. But it changed everything, and somewhere, deep inside a life she hadn't even dreamed of yet, Elena Brooks took her very first step toward a future she never saw coming. You're in the wrong building, Caleb Whitmore said. Simple words, devastating ones. For a moment, Elena Brooks was certain the ground would crack open and swallow her whole. Honestly, she would have welcomed it. But instead of mumbling an apology and running for her life, something strange happened, something reckless. She blinked at him and said, lightly, well, I'm already here, and I make a dangerously good cup of coffee. Plus, I answer phones with the enthusiasm of a Broadway understudy. Need someone to say, good morning. How can I assist you today? In 6 different moods, I'm your girl. There was a heartbeat of stunned silence. And then, impossibly, Caleb Whitmore laughed. It was brief, soft, almost like he didn't mean for it to happen. But it was real. And in that one moment, everything shifted. You're seriously pitching yourself for a job you didn't even know existed 5 minutes ago, he asked. Amusement flickering in his voice. Elena shrugged, a half smile tugging at her lips. I call it professional flexibility. I adapt. You want someone who can file reports, juggle coffee orders, and maybe babysit your pet goldfish. I'm versatile. Caleb leaned back in his chair, studying her like a puzzle he didn't quite know what to make of. And then casually, almost offhandedly, he said something that knocked the breath right out of her. Start tomorrow, 8 sharp. Elena blinked. I'm sorry. What? Personal secretary. Office next to mine. You'll need coffee, paper, and... He gave her a dry smile. God help me. Enthusiasm. Before she could string together a coherent sentence, Caleb Whitmore stood up, and as he walked toward the door, he added over his shoulder, Don't call me sir. It's Caleb. Just Caleb. Then he was gone, leaving Elena sitting there stunned, wide-eyed, clutching her visitor badge like it was a golden ticket she hadn't even known she was competing for. She had walked into the wrong building, and somehow walked out with a job. Session 1 hired by mistake, kept by surprise. The elevator ride down felt unreal. Elena stood silently in the corner, staring at her reflection in the mirror-polished walls. The badge around her neck read, Employee Access, Whitmore Global. She touched it lightly, as if afraid it would vanish. I just got hired by a stranger, she whispered to her reflection, in a company I wasn't even supposed to be in. She laughed, then half giddy, half terrified. A janitor entered the elevator at the 10th floor, pushing a cart of supplies. Elena turned to him with wide eyes and blurted, "He said I start tomorrow." The janitor gave her a polite, non-committal nod like he'd seen far stranger things between these gleaming walls. Maybe he had. When the elevator doors opened, Elena stepped into the blinding Manhattan sun. She squinted against the light, letting the moment sink into her skin. She should have called someone, screamed the news into the phone. But when she checked her notifications, her screen was empty. No missed calls, no new messages, just her, and the city stretching out wide and impossible before her. She hesitated. Then, almost without thinking, she dialed the one number etched into her heart. "Mom," she said when the line clicked alive. There was a pause, and then, with a trembling laugh, "You're not going to believe this." That night, sleep was a stranger. Elena lay awake on her creaky mattress, staring at the lazy whirl of the ceiling fan. Her resume crumpled. Coffee-stained sat on the floor like a discarded relic of the life she thought she was chasing. She kept replaying it. The way Caleb had looked her in the eye, the way he'd said, "Start tomorrow," the way, for one moment, she hadn't felt invisible. She hadn't been small. She had been seen. What kind of man made a decision like that? And more terrifying, why her? There were no answers that night. Only a heart pounding with fear, and maybe something dangerously close to hope. Maybe this wasn't a mistake after all. Maybe this was the beginning of something she hadn't dared to dream about. Maybe this was her plot twist. The next morning, Elena woke an hour before her alarm. She stood in front of her open closet, her entire wardrobe a collection of desperate compromises. She stared at two blouses. One said, "I'm responsible." The other whispered, "I'm trying my best." Neither felt right. But today wasn't about perfect. Today was about showing up. And somehow, she knew today was going to change everything. In the end, Elena couldn't choose. So, she layered both blouses because that's what anxiety does. If one armor wasn't enough, maybe two would be. By 7:15 a.m., she was already on the bus, her employee badge tucked into her pocket like a fragile secret. Her heart thudded against her ribs, wild and relentless, as the city blurred past the scratched windows. By 7:52 a.m., Elena walked into the lobby of Whitmore Global, trying her best to look like she belonged, sort of. Her steps echoed across the polished marble floor, every nerve ending screaming imposter. The 19th floor was worse, glass walls everywhere, conversations in hushed, clipped tones, the faint, sterile scent of eucalyptus clinging to the air. It smelled like ambition, and money, and 1,000 closed doors. Elena tried to mimic purpose, nodding stiffly at a man in an impeccable navy suit. He didn't nod back. Classic. She found the door she vaguely remembered from yesterday and hesitated, steadying herself. Before she could knock, the door swung open sharply. Standing there was a woman who radiated efficiency like perfume. Blonde bob, pressed blazer, expression that could cut glass. "Amanda," she said crisply, extending no hand, no smile. "You're early." Elena straightened her spine. "I bring optimism," she said brightly. "And a granola bar if you get hungry." Amanda didn't blink. She turned on her heel, motioning for Elena to follow. "This is your desk," Amanda said, pointing to a minimalist setup against the glass. "You're Mr. Whitmore's personal secretary. That means managing his calendar, screening his calls, and if you're lucky, you'll get a nod of approval when nothing catches fire." Elena nodded solemnly. "I live for approval," nods. Amanda's mouth twitched. "Almost." She pointed to the sleek company laptop. "Start here. Learn the system. Don't delete anything. Don't CC the CFO by accident. And never, ever, interrupt Caleb when he's wearing his headphones." "Understood," Elena said. "Serious. Sacred Spotify sessions respected." Amanda's eyebrow lifted slightly. I can't tell if that's sarcasm or terror. Elena smiled. A little bit of both. By 10 a.m. Elena had clicked every wrong folder imaginable. She accidentally called facilities instead of finance. She tried to print the employee handbook and ended up printing 43 copies of a 2-year-old holiday memo that screamed, Merry Techmass in Comic Sans. At one point, she spilled half her water bottle across an important-looking spreadsheet and whispered, horrified, No, no. You have value. You're important as she scrambled to save the soggy pages. It was pure chaos. But it was her kind of chaos. Just before lunch, the door to Caleb's office opened. He walked out holding a coffee mug that said Curl plus Alt plus Del. Of course. He paused at her desk, eyed the 3 sticky notes slapped across her forehead. One read, check email. Another, don't forget Caleb's 3 p.m. And the last, simply breathe. You're still here, he observed, the barest flicker of amusement in his eyes. Elena saluted. Haven't been fired yet. That's a win in my book. Caleb's lips twitched the ghost of a smirk. He stared at the sticky notes. Interesting filing system. Elena shrugged. Grinning. Very cutting edge. Forehead-based organization. You'll see it on Forbes next quarter. For half a heartbeat. It looked like he might actually laugh again. Instead, he simply nodded and disappeared back into his office. Approval nod unlocked. Achievement breathe. At lunch, Elena sat alone at a corner table in the sleek cafeteria. Stirring a cup of soup, she wasn't hungry enough to eat. She was surrounded by people in designer shoes and designer lives, and she felt like a misplaced puzzle piece. Maybe it was only a matter of time before someone noticed she didn't belong, before they realized she wasn't polished enough, wasn't clever enough, wasn't enough. Then a voice cut through her thoughts. You're the secretary who got hired by accident, right? She looked up. A guy with a lazy grin and an IT badge dropped into the seat beside her. That's me, Elena said with a self-deprecating smile. Walking typo, human glitch. I'm Eduardo, he said, extending a hand. Welcome to the island of misfit hires. She laughed real unguarded for the first time that day. You'll be fine, Eduardo said, nudging her soup with his spoon. Whitmore's weird, but he's fair. If you can make him laugh, you're halfway to sainthood around here. Elena blinked. I think I might have done that yesterday. Eduardo grinned wide. Then you, my friend, might just be his miracle. Session 2. Coffee, calendars, and chaos. Some jobs came with benefits. This one. It came with feelings she hadn't even begun to understand yet. It wasn't worry that kept Elena awake the night before, at least. Not entirely. It was the endless spiral of what-ifs. What if yesterday had been a fluke? What if she showed up today only to be met with a cold smile and the words, Sorry, Ms. Brooks. Your miracle has expired. But at 7:58 a.m., she stepped through the polished glass doors of Whitmore Global, same badge, same hopeful smile, and the receptionist barely glanced up before waving her through. Progress, tiny, but hers. By 8:10, Elena had already managed to spill coffee on her notes, trip over her own feet near the copier, and lock herself out of her computer account because she'd typed her password into the username field 3 times. Still, she wasn't giving up. Not when it felt this strangely right to be here. Not when, for the first time in too long, she wanted to fight for something. At 8:45 sharp, Caleb Whitmore swept into the office. His navy suit was razor sharp, his presence cutting a clean line through the morning noise. He stopped briefly at Elena's desk, his gaze flickering across the chaos she had built. Sticky notes climbing her monitor like ivy, an open notebook with the words, Don't panic yet, scrawled across the top. Busy morning, he asked. Voice dry as desert air. Elena smiled brightly. A grin stitched together with nerves and stubborn hope. Productive chaos, she said. Caleb studied her for a beat longer than necessary. Then, without a word, he nodded the rare and unofficial Whitmore global sign of approval before disappearing into his office. Seconds later, Amanda materialized at her side, her expression somewhere between exasperation and admiration. "You told legal," Amanda said crisply, "that Mr. Whitmore was currently on a call with the universe." Elena blinked. "That might have happened," Amanda sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. "Come on," she said. "Let's review the phone script again." By noon, Elena was finding her rhythm. Sort of. She had only called facilities instead of IT once. She had only printed 18 unnecessary copies of a cafeteria flyer, and she was starting to understand the complex art of translating Caleb's minimal grunts into actual, functioning appointments, small victories. The office buzzed around her, phones ringing, sneakers squeaking on polished floors, urgent conversations over folders and espressos, and then her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Grandma Dolores flashed on the screen. Elena answered instinctively, slipping into her best professional tone, "Whitmore Global." "This is Elena speaking." A firm, warm voice crackled through the line. "Is this the girl keeping my grandson from turning into a spreadsheet with legs?" Elena blinked. I'm sorry," the voice chuckled. "This is Dolores Whitmore, Caleb's grandmother." Her tone softened. "You must be the new assistant. Are you the one who made him laugh last week? I almost fainted when he told me." Elena's mind scrambled. I might have been involved." "Good," Dolores said firmly. "That boy needs more people like you." A pause. "Tell him to call me. And sweetheart, you're coming to dinner Friday night." Click. The line went dead. Elena sat there for a moment, the receiver still pressed against her ear, wondering if she had just been summoned to dinner by her boss's grandmother at 3:00 p.m. Caleb emerged from his office, cradling what was probably his third coffee of the day. He paused by her desk. "You have a call to return?" Elena said. Flipping through her notes, she hesitated, then added, "Dolores Whitmore. Very sweet, slightly terrifying. Also, I think I'm going to dinner at her house." Caleb froze mid-sip. "You're invited, more like commanded," Elena said, eyes wide. He sighed, setting his coffee down. "She's determined," he said grimly. "I gathered," Elena replied, trying to hide her grin. Caleb scrubbed a hand through his hair for once, looking almost human. "She's been trying to set me up with someone for years," he said, grimacing. "Family dinners usually come with surprise fiancés." Elena raised an eyebrow. "So," she said slowly, "I'm going to be dinner entertainment and your human shield." Caleb smiled, a real one, warm and fleeting. "You're surprisingly good at multitasking." She winked. "I contain multitudes." For a moment, something shifted. Something heavier passed behind his eyes. A thought, a regret, a flicker of, what if? What if? Caleb said carefully, "You didn't just come as my assistant." Elena blinked. "I'm sorry." He leaned closer, voice dropping to something softer. "What if you came to dinner?" "As my girlfriend," Elena echoed. Staring at Caleb like he had grown an extra head, he looked completely serious. "Temporarily," he clarified, "just enough to keep my grandmother from organizing my wedding to one of her yoga classmates." Elena leaned back slowly in her chair, crossing her arms. "So you're asking your assistant, the same assistant who wrestled a paper shredder this morning, to lie to your family?" "Technically," Caleb said, utterly unbothered. "But in my defense, you're oddly convincing." She shook her head, fighting a grin. "This is insane. I'm aware." There was a long, charged pause. Then Elena tilted her head. playful sparks lighting her eyes. "All right. Mr. Whitmore, what's in it for me?" Caleb smiled small, but real, flexible hours, a generous bonus, and he paused, mock solemn, the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to witness a rare, mythical event, my grandmother's approval. Elena pretended to weigh her options, tapping her chin dramatically. "Fine," she said at last, "but I have conditions." "Of course you do." "3," she added, holding up her fingers. "1, no public pet names unless absolutely necessary. Deal. 2, if anyone asks how we met, we're telling them the truth over toner and truly terrible coffee." Caleb chuckled under his breath. "Done." "And 3." Elena leaned forward, voice lowering like she was about to negotiate world peace. "You have to actually pretend to like me. Eye contact. Smiling. Full Oscar-worthy performance." Caleb's mouth quirked in something dangerously close to a real smile. "You're hired," he said. She laughed. "I was already hired." He shrugged, completely unfazed. "Now you're hired again. Friday night." Elena stood outside Caleb's building, smoothing the skirt of her navy dress. Her favorite lipstick, the one she saved for important interviews and impossible days, made her feel braver than she was. She didn't look expensive, didn't look effortless, but she looked like herself, and that was enough. When Caleb opened the door, he gave her a quick once-over, then said in his usual dry tone, "You look appropriate." Elena arched a brow. "You look like someone who's already rescheduled next Tuesday's emotions." In the car, they drove, mostly in silence. Not uncomfortable, just the quiet of two people rehearsing a lie neither of them was fully ready to tell. When they arrived at Dolores Whitmore's house, the door opened almost before they knocked. Dolores greeted them with a smile that could disarm a politician, sharp eyes sparkling with something far too knowing. She pulled Elena into a hug before she could even react. "You," Dolores said warmly, "look like someone who might just turn my grandson back into a human being." Elena laughed, a little breathless. "I try," she said, one sarcastic comment at a time, over dinner. Elena played her part beautifully. She teased Caleb about his coffee addiction, laughed too loud at his dry, unexpected jokes, even managed to convince Dolores that Caleb had once attempted to cook for her and burned the rice beyond salvation. "Progress," Dolores said, lifting her wine glass. "At least he tried." Caleb muttered something about culinary betrayal, but there was a soft gleam in his eyes Elena hadn't seen before. Later, on the ride back, Elena stared out the car window at the dark, humming streets of New York. She exhaled slowly, half in awe, half in exhaustion. "I think I just survived a fake relationship trial by fire," she said, mostly to herself. Caleb didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was quieter, softer. "You were perfect." She smiled, small and secret. But neither of them could quite shake the feeling that somewhere along the way, the line between pretending and feeling had blurred, and once that happened, trouble was never far behind. Session 3. The move-in clause. Because at some point, pretending starts to feel dangerously close to the truth. Caleb Whitmore never did anything halfway. So when his phone buzzed with a message from his grandmother reading, "Might stop by your place soon. Want to see how the happy couple is living," his blood pressure probably spiked high enough to break records. Elena had only been his pretend girlfriend for 5 days. 5 chaotic, hilarious, oddly easy days. And now his grandmother wanted proof, visual confirmation, a cozy domestic scene. He stared at his phone for a long moment, then rose from his desk and crossed the hall to where Elena sat, scribbling a reminder on a sticky note that read, "Don't forget to pretend you have it together." He cleared his throat. Elena. She looked up. smiling, already teasing. Yes, my charmingly grumpy fake boyfriend. He almost smiled. Almost. We have a problem. I'm listening, she said, tapping her pen against the desk. My grandmother wants to visit. He rubbed the back of his neck. Soon, possibly without warning, and she expects, he said grimly, to see us living together. Together, Elena echoed, tilting her head. You mean, like, brunch together? Caleb didn't smile. No, he said evenly. I mean living together. The air between them shifted, subtle, but undeniable. You're saying, Elena said carefully, your grandmother expects me to be at your apartment. She'll want to see us cohabiting. Caleb confirmed, blissfully in love. Probably with matching toothbrushes and a shared Netflix password. Elena leaned back slowly in her chair, folding her arms. And you're telling me this because... Caleb ran a hand through his hair, something almost sheepish in the gesture. Because I think... He paused, then said it blunt as always. You need to move in. Elena just stared at him, deadpan. You do realize, she said slowly, you just asked your assistant, the one who tripped over a potted plant this morning, to move into your penthouse, only temporarily. He said, unfazed, a few weeks, maybe less, just until the pressure lets up. She stood, crossing her arms tighter across her chest. You want me to live under the same roof as you, smile on cue, pretend we share a Spotify account and argue over throw pillows. He nodded, perfectly serious. That's the idea. Elena was silent for a long moment. Then she tilted her head. Do I get my own bathroom? Absolutely. And a bedroom with a locking door, she pressed, non-negotiable, and snacks. She added, real snacks, not sad celery sticks masquerading as health food. Caleb gave a small shrug. I'll stock the pantry. She narrowed her eyes, considering, throw in a cookie jar. And you've got a deal. Caleb extended his hand, his expression somewhere between amusement and resignation. Welcome to your new temporary home. Elena shook it firmly, her heart thudding against her ribs. God help us both, she muttered. Later that night, Elena stood outside Caleb's building with a battered suitcase, a pillow tucked under one arm, and a tote bag labeled Essentials, plus Emergency, Chocolate. When Caleb opened the door, he took one look at her and the lopsided tower of luggage and said dryly, Did you bring your entire apartment, just the parts with personality? Elena chirped. Caleb stepped aside, letting her in. The inside was exactly what she had expected. Sleek, minimalist, aggressively spotless. No clutter, no color, no signs that anyone truly lived here. Elena wandered into the living room, turning slowly in a circle. This place, she said finally, looks like a magazine spread. She paused. Where's the chaos? The half-dead plants? The unmatched socks? The evidence that a human being actually breathes here? They don't exist, Caleb said simply. Arms crossed. Well, buckle up, she said cheerfully, because I come with tangled charger cords, snack wrappers, and the occasional 3 a.m. musical humming. Caleb gestured down the hall. Guest rooms to the right. Make it yours. But, he added, deadpan. No glitter. No promises. Elena called over her shoulder. Within 10 minutes, Elena had already transformed the guest room, a colorful scarf draped over the bed, 2 mismatched books on the nightstand, a framed photo of her and her mother from a Christmas long ago. Small touches, but enough to stake a claim. Caleb leaned against the doorway, watching her work. You move in like you've done this before, he said. Elena smiled without turning around. I grew up bouncing between apartments with my mom, 5 places across 2 states. I can claim space faster than FEMA. He let out a soft laugh, barely audible, but real. We need ground rules, he said. Elena grabbed her notebook with a dramatic flourish. Hit me, Rule 1. Caleb began. No entering each other's rooms without knocking. Fair. Rule 2. No judgment on my cereal consumption habits. Elena grinned. You have cereal habits. And Rule 3, Caleb continued. Shared spaces stay clean. Except… He hesitated. When emotional breakdowns require emergency ice cream on the couch. Exception granted, Elena said solemnly. Pretending to scribble it down, they grinned at each other. For a moment, it didn't feel like pretending. It felt easy. That first night was strange. They sat at opposite ends of the long glass dining table. Caleb cooked grilled salmon and asparagus with the precision of someone following blueprints. Elena contributed a bag of frozen mozzarella sticks she insisted were a cultural experience. Later, they found themselves on opposite ends of the giant sectional couch, watching a cooking show neither of them really cared about. Do you always eat that healthy? Elena asked, poking at the salmon. I like structure, Caleb said. Consistency. He gave her a sideways glance. I don't need flavor to survive. Elena snorted, nearly spilling her water. That should go on your tombstone. At 1:14 a.m. Elena padded into the kitchen for a glass of water. She found Caleb already there, sitting alone in the dark. A mug of tea cradled in his hands. You don't sleep, she whispered. He didn't look up. I don't sleep well. And there, in the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the distant city lights, Elena realized something. This man wasn't just sharp suits and closed doors. He carried his own invisible wars, too. He didn't explain, and Elena didn't ask. Some things didn't need words. Sometimes silence was the kindest gift you could offer. Instead, she simply slid into the seat beside Caleb, her bare feet curling against the cool kitchen tiles. After a long moment, she said lightly, I snore. You know, loudly, like an old car with asthma. A small, unexpected laugh escaped Caleb, a soft crack in the walls he kept so carefully built. I talk in my sleep. He offered back, usually about quarterly projections and budget allocations. Elena grinned. Financial pillow talk. Very sexy. They sat in easy silence again, the city lights flickering across the marble countertops. For a moment, it almost felt real. Then Elena said, voice quieter, you know this is going to get complicated, right? Caleb stared into his mug. I know, he said, but we're just pretending. He added, almost like a reminder to himself, we are. Elena agreed. She hesitated, then whispered, but pretending has a funny way of turning real. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The weight of it hung heavy in the dark. The next morning, Elena hummed softly as she brewed coffee, the scent filling the kitchen. She played her anti-silence playlist, soft jazz and mellow guitar, spilling into the crisp stillness. When Caleb walked in, perfectly dressed as always, he raised an eyebrow. You planning a dinner party? Elena grinned. Nope, just hate kitchens that sound like morgues. He poured himself a cup, took a cautious sip, and mumbled, not bad. Elena beamed. A compliment. I'm going to frame it and hang it over the espresso machine. That afternoon, Caleb's phone buzzed. He picked it up, frowning immediately when he saw the name, Grandma Dolores. How's my favorite couple, Dolores chirped. Caleb closed his eyes briefly. We're adjusting. Good, she said, because I might swing by on Sunday afternoon. Caleb's hand tightened around the phone. You're coming. Here I want to see the love nest, she said sweetly. Don't worry, I'm bringing cookies. There was a beat of silence. You're living together. Right, Dolores pressed. Yes, Caleb said, jaw tightening. Sleeping in separate rooms. Yes. Well, make sure it doesn't look that way, she added, her voice sharpening. I want to see love. Caleb, not legal boundaries. Click. When Caleb told Elena, she almost choked on her protein bar. She's inspecting us. Elena gasped. She wants evidence. Caleb rubbed the back of his neck. Photos, shoes by the door, a toothbrush in my bathroom, strategic chaos. Elena stared at him. Deadly serious. Caleb, we are one fake puppy away from a Hallmark movie. He didn't even smile. Instead, he said quietly, simply, I just need you to be there. Not perfect. Not anything you're not. Just there. For a long second, she couldn't breathe. Then she nodded. I can do that. Session 4. The inspection. Because you can fake love with words, but not with your eyes. Sunday afternoon arrived like a storm disguised in polite smiles and floral perfume. The air in Caleb's penthouse buzzed with quiet tension. Elena had been obsessively fluffing the couch pillows for nearly 20 minutes, which was hilarious, considering the couch already looked like it had been aligned by NASA technicians. Do you think she'll notice the separate rooms? Elena asked, pacing barefoot across the living room, clutching a potted plant she didn't even remember buying. Caleb didn't look up from his phone, where he was reviewing a spreadsheet like it might save him from actual human interaction. I left your scarf draped over a chair, toothbrushes in the bathroom, shoes by the door, he said. That's more fake intimacy than most reality shows. Elena snorted. She's not just any grandmother, she muttered. She's Dolores Whitmore, the woman who terrifies half your board of directors. Caleb sighed heavily. I should have just told her we broke up. Let her have the victory. Never, Elena said, dropping dramatically onto the couch. She flashed him a grin. Besides, we're actually kind of convincing. For a fraction of a second, Caleb's gaze lingered on her too long to be casual. He didn't look away. You're right, he said softly. You are? Before Elena could process the shiver that ran through her chest, the doorbell rang. She jumped up, smoothing her dress, and whispered like they were about to launch a covert mission. Operation Sweet Old Lady is go. Caleb opened the door, and there she was. Dolores Whitmore, pink cashmere cardigan, oversized sunglasses, a box of cookies in her arms that probably contained more butter than flour, and a smile sharp enough to cut through steel. Well, look at this. Dolores Whitmore beamed as she swept into the apartment like she owned every inch of it. Two beautiful liars, pretending they're not madly in love. Elena blinked, caught completely off guard. Excuse me, she managed. Dolores waved a hand as if brushing aside the entire notion. I brought lemon cookies, she announced, lifting a box tied with pink ribbon. They're shaped like hearts. Very subtle, aren't they? Behind her? Caleb closed the door with a sigh that sounded dangerously close to defeat. Hi, Grandma. Oh, hush, she said, flicking her wrist dismissively. You don't call, you don't text. I have to stalk your life through Instagram just to confirm you're still breathing. I don't have Instagram, Caleb muttered. I follow your assistant, Dolores said, utterly unbothered, much more entertaining. Elena offered a sheepish smile. I post emotionally charged sandwiches. Dolores laughed. Settling herself onto the couch like royalty taking her throne, she looked around, sharp eyes scanning every immaculate surface. Nice apartment, she said finally, tapping a manicured finger against her teacup. But it's missing something. Caleb raised an eyebrow from where he stood in the kitchen. Like what life? Dolores said simply, clutter, noise. You know things real people have. She touched the scarf Elena had left draped across a chair, the shoes by the door, the sad little plant already wilting in the corner. You see it, Dolores said, smiling. I overwatered it, Elena admitted, cringing. You overlove, darling, Dolores said warmly, patting her hand. It's a gift. Caleb retreated to the kitchen under the pretense of making coffee. Muttering something about needing caffeine for emotional combat, Dolores leaned closer to Elena, her voice dropping. How's he doing? Really? Elena hesitated, then spoke carefully. He's trying. He doesn't say much, but he listens. And he remembers things I didn't even realize I said. Dolores studied her, the weight of generations behind her gaze. Then she smiled, soft, knowing. I knew it. She said, knew what? That you're the girl who's going to wreck his loneliness. They moved to the coffee table, sharing lemon cookies and awkward small talk. Elena did most of the talking. Dolores did most of the smiling. And Caleb. He refilled the teacups like it was the only thing keeping him from unraveling. So, Dolores said casually, stirring her tea, tell me how you two met. Elena and Caleb exchanged a brief glance, the kind that could have said 100 things, but settled on one agreed-upon lie. They had rehearsed this, in panicked whispers by the office coffee machine. Elena smiled. He offered me sugar for the tea. Caleb added, perfectly on cue. Dolores narrowed her eyes, amused. How romantic. And then, Elena continued breezily, I tripped in the elevator. He caught me. She added dramatically, very cinematic. Dolores said, clearly entertained. She's exaggerating. Caleb said under his breath, I'm embellishing. Elena corrected primly. There's a difference? Dolores laughed to herself and rose to her feet, brushing cookie crumbs from her cardigan. Well, she said, now I've seen what I needed to see. She paused at the door, turning back to them with a sharpness that cut through the sweetness. You two are either Oscar-worthy actors, or this little charade isn't so little anymore. Caleb stiffened. Grandma. She lifted a hand, silencing him with a gesture. Relax. I won't say a word, but trust me. I've been around long enough to know the difference. She smiled. But it was the kind of smile that came with wisdom earned from a lifetime of watching love pretend not to be love. You know what makes love real? She said, her voice softening. Not the grand gestures, not the dinners. She glanced between them, eyes twinkling. It's who you miss. When the apartment gets quiet, and then she was gone, the door clicking shut behind her. The silence that filled the space afterward was heavy, tangible. Elena sank onto the couch, staring at the door like it might open again. I think I just got psychoanalyzed, she murmured. By an 80-year-old armed with lemon cookies. Caleb exhaled slowly. She does that. He said, catches you off guard. Elena turned, studying him. She said, we're lying to ourselves. Caleb didn't answer. Do you think we are? She asked quietly. Still. Silence. Then almost too softly to hear, he said, I think I haven't had this much peace in years. A beat. Then he added, glancing at her sideways, even with all your humming. Elena smiled, feeling something unfamiliar flutter in her chest, especially with your humming. He amended. She looked at him, really looked, and what she saw wasn't detachment or coldness. It was something vulnerable, something raw, the kind of thing that only escapes when walls begin to crumble. Elena stood slowly, brushing imaginary dust from her jeans. I should probably move my scarf out of your room, she said lightly, in case your grandmother shows up with a second batch of heart-shaped cookies. But neither of them moved. Neither of them wanted to break the fragile, trembling thread stretched between them. She turned, ready to retrieve the scarf from Caleb's room, a small, colorful reminder that didn't quite belong among the muted grays and sharp edges. But Caleb stepped closer, his voice soft. Leave it. Elena blinked, hand pausing mid-reach. Why? He hesitated just for a second, then said, almost too quietly, because it's the only thing that makes that room feel lived in. She didn't reply, didn't have words. Her heart did the talking instead, thudding, tumbling, aching against her ribs, without a sound. She slipped away, walking back to her room, closing the door softly behind her, pressing her back against it. She exhaled a trembling breath. They were pretending. Both of them knew it, and yet none of it felt pretend anymore. Session 5, the elevator moment. Because every great story needs one, this was theirs. It started with a power outage. One moment. Elena was hunched over the printer, wrestling tomorrow's schedule into order. The next. Everything went black. Screens flickered. The low hum of machinery died. The building held its breath. Is that normal? She said aloud, half to herself. Almost immediately, Caleb appeared from his office, his phone casting a muted glow across his face. Backup generator should kick in, he said, his voice calm but sharpened by alertness. Give it a minute. The minute came and went. The silence stretched into something uneasy. Amanda, ever composed, even in chaos, appeared at the end of the hallway, building-wide failure. She announced, arms crossed, elevators are locked, emergency lights only, could be hours. Caleb frowned, tapping his fingers against his side. How does a multi-million-dollar tech firm lose power in the middle of Manhattan? Amanda shrugged, deadpan. Maybe the universe is tired of spreadsheets, perched on the edge of her desk. Elena grinned. I've always said this place needed more drama. Caleb looked at her, and for once, let the faintest smile escape. You want drama? He said. Come with me. The elevator was dark, bathed in the eerie red glow of emergency lighting. It looked like a scene from a film, half haunting, half heartbreak waiting to happen. Caleb hit the ground floor button out of habit. Nothing happened. You do realize? Elena teased, raising an eyebrow. That it's not going anywhere. Old habit, Caleb muttered. Shoving his hands into his pockets, they stood there, still, not quite touching, breathing the same thin air. This, Elena said lightly, is either the beginning of a horror movie or a pivotal emotional moment. Caleb's lips tilted into a small, rare smile. Let's hope for the second one, she laughed softly, the sound wrapping around the quiet like a thread. You know what's funny? She said after a beat. I used to think the big moments in life would come with fireworks, trumpets, grand speeches. She glanced sideways at him. But lately it's been coffee, sticky notes, your stupidly perfect hair. Caleb turned, the barest glimmer of amusement in his eyes. You think my hair is perfect? She gave him a teasing smile. Statistically speaking, yes. It's actually offensive. Silence settled again, but this time, it wasn't heavy. It was charged, breathless, waiting. You're different, Caleb said suddenly, voice low. Elena turned toward him, her heart thudding. Different, how he didn't look at her at first, just stared straight ahead. You walk into a room and everything shifts. He said, you mess things up. But somehow you fix them, too. He exhaled. You irritate me, and you calm me. At the same time, Elena blinked, her throat tightening. Her heart didn't just skip. It launched. Caleb, she said softly. He finally turned, really turned, and looked at her, eyes dark and vulnerable in the half-light. I don't know when it happened, he said, but pretending. It stopped feeling like pretending. Elena's breath caught, frozen between wanting to move closer and being too afraid to break the fragile thing between them. I thought keeping it simple would be safer, Caleb said. But nothing about this, about you, is simple. Your chaos, your warmth, your every unexpected thing I didn't know I needed. Elena swallowed hard, feeling her own defenses cracking. You kissed me once, she whispered, then acted like it didn't happen. Caleb's jaw tightened. Because if I acknowledged it, he said, his voice raw, then it would have been real. A beat, a breath, a lifetime in a second. It was real. Before either of them could say another word, The elevator lights flickered violently, a strobe of brightness and shadow. And in that brief, breathless chaos, Caleb stepped forward, closed the space between them, and with a tenderness that undid her completely, he rested his forehead against hers. Not a kiss, not yet, but a beginning. "I'm scared," Caleb whispered, his forehead still pressed lightly against hers. "So am I." Elena breathed back, but neither of them moved. Neither pulled away. Instead, it was Elena who leaned in first, and this time, there was no contract, no plan, no pretending. He kissed her, slow, uncertain at first, shaky not from doubt, but from everything that mattered. It wasn't perfect. It was better. It was real. When they finally broke apart, Elena rested her hands lightly against his chest, feeling the thrum of his heart under her palms. "So, now what?" she whispered. Caleb's voice was rough with unspoken things. "Now," he said, "we stop lying. To your grandmother," Elena teased gently, his lips curved. "To ourselves." When the elevator jolted back to life 10 minutes later, and the emergency lights gave way to normalcy, the world outside remained the same, but they had changed. Something fragile and fierce had cracked open between them, something terrifying, something beautiful. Caleb walked ahead slightly, but at the threshold of his office, he turned back, his eyes catching hers. "Dinner tonight?" he said, voice steady, no pretending. "Just us." Elena smiled. "A slow, blooming thing. I'll bring the cookies." That night, they sat cross-legged on the polished wood floor of Caleb's impossibly neat living room. Takeout containers scattered around them, wine sloshing gently in mismatched glasses. Caleb still wore his white button-up. The sleeves rolled to his elbows. Elena wore one of his oversized hoodies, her face scrubbed free of makeup, her hair messy from the day. Somehow, it was the most intimate they had ever been. No roles, no expectations, just them. "I keep thinking," Elena said between bites of noodles, "how bizarre it is that all of this started because I walked into the wrong building." Caleb set his glass down carefully and studied her for a long moment. "No," he said at last, his voice low. "You walked into the right one. You just didn't know it yet." Elena tilted her head, smiling at him through the dim glow of the kitchen light. Then, "What was I hired for?" "Exactly?" Caleb's gaze softened, something unguarded flashing across his face. "To remind me," he whispered, "that I'm still alive." The words hit harder than any kiss. Elena's throat tightened. No one had ever said something like that to her. She reached out, threading her fingers through his, and whispered back, "And you reminded me I'm still worth something." They didn't kiss again that night. They didn't need to. Because sometimes love doesn't announce itself with fireworks and grand declarations. Sometimes, it simply arrives quiet and steady in a broken elevator, a half-eaten dinner, and a silence you never want to leave. Session 6. The X returns, because the past never knocks. It barges in. It was a rainy Wednesday when the past decided to make its entrance dramatic. Uninvited, and as unwelcome as a storm through an open window. Elena was at the coffee machine on the 19th floor, humming under her breath, feeling lighter than she had in months, ever since the elevator. Everything had shifted, subtle but sure. There were no more unspoken rules, no more careful distance, just small glances across the room, smiles that lingered longer than necessary. And the way Caleb seemed to know exactly when she needed a silly sticky note or a stolen 5 minutes of quiet. Things weren't perfect, but they were real. And for Elena, that was enough. Until the elevator dinged and Trouble walked in wearing designer heels, tall, effortless, radiating the kind of confidence that only came from knowing exactly how much history she carried on her shoulders. A woman in a deep burgundy trench coat and oversized sunglasses, even though it was raining, stepped into the lobby like she owned it. Her smirk said she already knew the ending to a game no one else realized they were playing. She didn't pause, didn't hesitate. She walked straight to the reception desk and said one name, Caleb Whitmore. Elena froze, coffee cup halfway to her lips. Some instinct twisted inside her, sharp and certain. Amanda appeared like a ghost from her office. Her face unreadable. "Miss Rachel," she said politely. "You're back." Rachel. Even the name sounded dangerous, like a memory wrapped in silk and sharpened at the edges. Amanda didn't smile. "Mr. Whitmore is in a meeting," she said smoothly. "I'll let him know you're here." "No need," Rachel said, waving her hand like royalty. "I remember the way," without waiting. She started walking, heels clicking against the marble floors, straight toward Caleb's office. Elena stepped into her path without thinking. "Can I help you?" Elena said, her voice calm but firm. Rachel turned, removing her sunglasses in one fluid motion. Her eyes, sharp and assessing, swept over Elena like she was weighing her. "And you are?" Rachel asked sweetly. Elena held her ground. "I work here," she said. "Steady. I manage Mr. Whitmore's schedule." Rachel smiled slow and clear, a smile that said, "I see you, and you have no idea what's coming, but you're not Amanda, and you're definitely not legal counsel," Elena said. Steadying her voice as she squared her shoulders, Rachel tilted her head. Amused, protective. "That's new." Before Elena could find a sharp reply, the door behind her opened. There he was, Caleb Whitmore, standing in the doorway, his face frozen mid-expression as if someone had cut the air clean out of the room. Rachel smiled like nothing had changed. "Hello, Caleb." Elena stepped back instinctively, unsure why her heart started racing, or why Caleb suddenly looked like a man standing on the edge of a fault line. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. He just stood there. Rachel, on the other hand, brushed past him into his office like she had every right to. The door clicked shut behind them, leaving Elena standing there, holding her breath, holding her fear. The meeting lasted exactly 27 minutes. Elena knew because she counted every second like tiny earthquakes rattling through her chest. When the door finally opened, Rachel emerged first, composed, triumphant, like someone who had already decided the ending of a story before anyone else had read it. Caleb followed a step behind, his face carefully unreadable. At the doorway, Rachel turned back casually, as if offering a parting shot. "Nice place," she said, voice light, still a little cold, though. Her gaze slid to Elena, sharp and cutting. "You're pretty. That helps." Then she turned, her heels clicking against the marble floor like gunshots, walking away without a glance back. Caleb didn't move, neither did Elena. It was her who broke the silence first, voice softer than she intended. "Want to tell me who that was?" Caleb hesitated, his hand tightening slightly at his side. "My ex-fiancé," he said finally. The word felt heavier than it should have, heavier than Elena wanted it to. "Fiancé?" she echoed, blinking. He nodded once. "We were engaged. A long time ago." Elena folded her arms, trying to hold herself together as Caleb continued, voice low and tired. "She's in town. She said she wanted to talk, wanted to see if—" He paused, meeting her eyes with something almost pained. "If we could try again." There it was, the punch to the gut she hadn't seen coming. "And what did you say?" Elena asked, bracing herself. Caleb exhaled slowly, every word deliberate. "I told her it's too late, that I'm not the same man, that I'm involved with someone else." She tried to smile, to lighten it, to make it a joke they could both step around. "That's me." "Right, the someone else." Caleb stepped closer. "You know it is." But Elena didn't answer. Instead, she turned, walking back to her desk, feeling the burn of invisible stares on her back. That night, back at the penthouse, the silence between them stretched until it filled every corner of the space. Caleb cooked dinner. They barely ate. Elena sat across from him, picking at her plate, trying not to picture her Rachel so polished, so confident, so neatly tied to the life Caleb once had. "You're not talking," Caleb said finally. "I'm thinking," Elena replied, her voice flat. "Thinking about whether I'm temporary." Caleb froze, the fork halfway to his mouth. "You're not. Don't lie to me." "Caleb," she said, looking him straight in the eye. "I've been lied to before. I know what it smells like." He put his fork down carefully, as if sudden movements might break something delicate between them. "She left me," he said quietly, 3 weeks before the wedding. Elena's eyes widened, but she stayed silent, letting him finish. "I spent a year afterward," Caleb continued, "trying to pick up pieces I didn't even realize were broken. I buried myself in work, in silence, in control." He looked up at her, then, and there was no mask left on his face, "Until you showed up." A breath caught in her throat. "Until you tripped into my life," Caleb said, the corner of his mouth twitching in something almost like a smile. Wearing a blazer 2 sizes too big and offering to organize broken hearts, Elena tried to laugh, but it got tangled somewhere inside her. "I'm not her," she whispered. "I know. I don't have her poise, or her confidence, or you have something she never had." He cut her off. "What's that?" He didn't hesitate. "You see me, not the surface, not the CEO." He leaned forward slightly, voice rough. "You see the mess underneath, and you stay." Elena felt the tears burning the backs of her eyes, the words hitting places too tender to touch. "I'm scared," she confessed. Caleb reached across the table, taking her hand in both of his. "So am I," he admitted. No shame in it anymore, but for the first time in a long time. He paused, squeezing her fingers gently. "I want to fight for something that isn't just a number, or a quarterly report." Elena looked at him, really looked, and realized that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't the only one learning how to stay. "Then don't let her back in," Elena said, holding Caleb's gaze steady. "I already closed that door," he murmured. She squeezed his hand, anchoring him. "Good," she said softly, but firmly, "because if you don't, I will." Later that night, the city's lights flickered across the penthouse windows like slow, distant stars. Elena sat curled up on the couch, wrapped in one of Caleb's oversized hoodies. Cradling a mug of tea between her hands, Caleb sat beside her, closer than he usually dared, their shoulders almost touching, their silences no longer heavy, but easy. "You know," Elena said after a long moment, her voice no more than a breath. "I never really had anyone fight for me. Not really. You do now," Caleb answered simply, without hesitation. For the first time in days, Elena let herself believe it completely, recklessly, with her whole heart. Session 7. The letter she wasn't supposed to find. Sometimes the words we never send speak louder than the ones we do. The apartment was quiet again the next morning. Not the brittle, broken silence of a few days ago, but the kind of quiet that happens when two people are learning how to exist around each other without fear. Caleb had left early for a board meeting. Elena had the day off, a rare and unexpected luxury. She moved through the penthouse slowly, comfortably, brewing coffee, playing her favorite mellow playlist, folding laundry that somehow had become half hers without either of them saying a word about it. Caleb's crisp shirts, his maddeningly symmetrical socks, the hoodie that was hers now, by squatter's rights and silent consent. While clearing the dining table, a folder slipped open, and a single sheet of paper drifted to the floor. Elena bent to retrieve it, intending to simply tuck it back inside, but a line of familiar handwriting caught her eye. To the girl I haven't met yet. Elena's heart stuttered. She hesitated a beat. A breath, then read, To the girl I haven't met yet. I don't know your name. I don't know the sound of your voice or the shape of your smile. I don't know if you love rainy mornings or hate the way I overthink everything. But I hope you exist, because right now, I'm tired. Tired of pretending I'm fine. Tired of filling my life with meetings and numbers and forgetting what laughter sounds like in the morning. Tired of being alone in a room full of noise. If you're out there, if you're real, I just want you to know this. I want to build something quiet with you. Not perfect, just true. I want to argue about stupid things like who left the milk out and whether jazz belongs in elevators. I want to hold your hand when we fight, and again when we're too tired to pretend we're not scared. I want to come home to someone who isn't impressed by my title but is impressed when I remember to buy flowers for no reason. I want you to see the parts of me I try so hard to hide, the parts even I'm afraid of, and I want you to stay anyway. And if we meet, I probably won't say any of this aloud. I'll hide behind sarcasm. I'll pretend I don't care, but please don't believe any of it. Believe this instead, I'm waiting for you, and I already miss you. Elena sat there, the letter trembling in her hands, reading it again and again and again, not because she didn't understand, but because she did. It wasn't just a letter. It was Caleb, the part of him few people ever saw, the part that made her tea at 2 a.m. without asking why she couldn't sleep, the part that kept her scarf tucked in his room long after the need for pretending had ended. The part that had, without meaning to, begun to stitch himself into her life and into her heart, and maybe, just maybe, into his own future, too, somehow. Even years ago, he had written to her, or maybe to someone like her, someone who would one day walk through his carefully ordered life and turn it inside out with nothing more than a smile. Tears blurred Elena's vision before she even realized they had formed. She carefully folded the letter back along its worn creases and placed it exactly where she found it. But the feeling, the knowing, stayed with her. That night, when Caleb returned home, Elena was already in the kitchen, barefoot, humming softly, stirring something in a pot that filled the apartment with the scent of cinnamon and quiet rebellion. He stopped in the doorway, blinking in surprise. "You cooked?" he asked. "Don't sound so shocked," Elena said, throwing him a look over her shoulder. "I thought you were more of a delivery connoisseur." "I am," he said easily, "but sometimes you cook for the people you care about." He hesitated, the weight of that sentence hanging between them. "What's the occasion?" he asked. Softer now. Elena turned, wooden spoon in hand, a small, secret smile playing at her lips. "Just wanted you to come home to something warm." There was something in her tone that pulled at him, something gentler than usual, something unguarded. He didn't question it. They ate together on the couch, legs tangled lazily. No TV, no distractions, only the hum of the city outside the windows, and the kind of silence that didn't feel empty anymore. Later, while clearing the coffee table, Caleb reached for a folder and paused. There, sitting quietly on top, was the letter. He knew it hadn't been there when he left. He looked up sharply. Elena was perched by the window, mug cradled between her hands, the city's lights painting her hair with gold and silver. Their eyes met across the room. "You wrote that before you knew me," she said gently. Caleb didn't move, didn't speak, and yet, she continued, her voice threading into the stillness, "It feels like you were writing to me anyway." His jaw tightened, a flash of something vulnerable crossing his face. "I never meant for anyone to see that," he said, his voice low. "I know," Elena said, smiling through the ache in her chest. "That's what makes it beautiful." He stepped closer, almost cautiously. Embarrassing, he muttered. It's honest, she corrected. And it's everything I've ever wanted someone to say, even if they didn't know they were saying it to me. Caleb stared at her, his heart pounding, his hands curled into fists to keep from reaching out. I meant it, he said finally, his voice barely more than a whisper. Every word. Elena rose from her seat, moving toward him slowly, like something inevitable. Then say it again, she said, her voice trembling, not with fear but with hope, not to some future version of me. Say it now, here. He swallowed hard. I want to build something quiet with you, he whispered. She stepped closer. And messy, she added, smiling through tears. And honest, he breathed. And complicated and beautiful. She finished for him. They stood inches apart now, caught in a gravity neither of them wanted to escape. Elena looked up at him, her eyes shining. Then I'm staying, she said, voice breaking on the edges of a laugh, not because of the letter, because of the man who wrote it. Caleb reached up, cupping her cheek like she was something he wasn't sure he deserved to touch. I've been waiting for you, he said. She smiled, the kind of smile that cracked things open inside him. I'm not going anywhere. And just like that, something unspoken between them became a vow. No grand speeches, no audience, no fanfare, just two people, choosing each other, again and again, in the quiet heartbeat of a shared life. Session 8. The almost goodbye. Some goodbyes don't happen with slammed doors. Sometimes they come with silence that gets too loud. It had been nearly 2 weeks since Elena found the letter. 2 weeks since Caleb spoke those words aloud, not from a piece of paper, but from the heart he kept so carefully hidden. Life had shifted, not with fireworks, not with sweeping declarations, but with small things, with ease. Elena woke up each morning knowing exactly where she belonged. Caleb came home each night and smiled like he meant it. They weren't perfect, but they were real. Which was why what happened next hurt so much more. It started with a box, small, unassuming, left quietly on Caleb's desk by Amanda. With a simple note, a delivery from legal. Elena hadn't thought much of it. She wasn't even supposed to notice it. But then she caught the sender's name printed neatly on the corner, Rachel Dawson. The name hit like a splash of cold water across her heart. She hadn't meant to open it. She knew better. But fear and curiosity made dangerous allies. Inside the box was a silver tie clip, sleek and polished, the kind that whispered history, memory, and tucked underneath it, a card. Elena's breath hitched, and suddenly, everything steady and safe began to tremble. Elena picked up the card with trembling fingers, her heart thudding painfully against her ribs. Caleb, I thought this belonged with you. I found it in the drawer you never emptied. Maybe some things are meant to find their way back. That night, Elena didn't say a word about the box, didn't mention the card, didn't ask why it was still sitting on his desk like a secret between them. Instead, she moved through dinner like a ghost, smiling too brightly, laughing too loudly, and when Caleb asked if she was okay, she lied with the kind of practiced ease that only comes from fear. I'm just tired, she said, and he believed her, because when you trust someone, sometimes you believe them even when you shouldn't. But trust has its limits. The next morning, Elena left the penthouse early. She told Amanda she was running an errand. In truth, she just needed space, air, something untouched by the ghost of someone else's history. She ended up in a quiet corner of Central Park, sitting on a bench with a coffee that had long since gone cold. Her phone switched off. Her mind racing. Was she overreacting, maybe? But that single line from the card gnawed at her like a splinter she couldn't remove. Maybe some things are meant to find their way back. What if Caleb was one of them? What if she was just a stop along the way, a chapter before the real story picked up again? At 11:42 a.m., Caleb noticed the empty desk outside his office. By 12:10 p.m., Amanda hesitantly informed him Elena had left without a word. By 12:45 p.m., he was calling her voicemail, his chest tightening with every unanswered ring. At 1:17 p.m., Caleb found the card, still sitting on his desk, unopened, the box untouched. He hadn't read it, hadn't even thought to open it, but Elena had, and now she was gone. That night, when Elena finally returned to the apartment, she didn't expect Caleb to be home. She didn't expect the lights to be off, the windows open, the city breathing quietly beyond the glass, and she certainly didn't expect the envelope sitting alone on the kitchen table, her name written in Caleb's steady handwriting. She stood there for a long time, staring at it, before she gathered the courage to pick it up. Elena, you disappeared today, and it scared me, not because you missed a meeting or a call, but because it reminded me how easy it is to lose something real when you stop saying what you feel. I didn't open the box. I didn't read her note. I didn't need to, because whatever was inside, it wasn't my future. You are. I don't know how to prove that, except by saying this: I choose you. Every day, even when it's messy, especially when it's messy. If you need space, I'll give it. If you need time, I'll wait. But if you walk out of this apartment for good, I need you to know one thing. You were never a replacement. You were the reason I believed again. And losing you would be the real mistake. Caleb. Elena wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her sweater, the letter trembling in her hands. She didn't even realize Caleb was standing there in the doorway until he spoke. I didn't see the card, he said gently, voice low, as if afraid he might scare her away. She turned, startled, still clutching the letter. I wasn't going to leave, she whispered. I just needed to breathe. I should have told you, Caleb said quietly, stepping closer. About the box, about her, about how even ghosts can still send mail. I should have trusted you. They stood there, suspended in a fragile silence, both of them with too many words and too few ways to say them. Elena stepped closer first. I was scared, she admitted, her voice shaking. So was I. Caleb said. They were inches apart now. You thought you were just a chapter, he said, but you're not. She looked up at him, searching, hoping. You're the rewrite, he whispered, smiling that small, broken smile she was beginning to understand better than anyone else, the one where the story finally makes sense. Elena let out a trembling breath, feeling the last of the walls crumble. So what now? She asked. Caleb's hand brushed hers, his touch tentative but sure. Now, he said, we stop letting fear write our story. And there, in the middle of a quiet kitchen filled with too many memories and too many second chances, they chose each other again. No grand speeches, no sweeping declarations, just two people, standing in the wreckage of almost losing each other, and deciding still to stay, and somehow, that night, it was everything. Session 9. The photo in the drawer. Some drawers stay closed for a reason. Some hearts. 2. The night after their almost goodbye. Elena couldn't sleep. Caleb was already in bed, breathing softly beside her, his hand resting loosely near hers on the blanket. She watched him for a long while, the steady rise and fall of his chest like a rhythm she wanted to trust, but her mind would not still. She slipped out of bed quietly, her bare feet whispering across the cold floors, and made her way into the living room. The apartment was still, lit only by the soft glow of a single lamp in the corner. Everything looked delicate in that light, like a memory caught in amber. Maybe it was the way things had felt fragile lately. Maybe it was the letter, the card, the almost lost moments between them. Or maybe it was fear, the kind that only grows when you realize just how much you have to lose Whatever it was, it pulled her toward Caleb's study, toward the drawer he never touched. She hadn't noticed it before, hadn't even thought about it. But tonight, the drawer called to her like a whisper she couldn't ignore. Inside, she found pens, a few old USB drives, a wrinkled company t-shirt folded neatly, and a photo. Elena pulled it out slowly, her heart already bracing itself. In the photo, Caleb looked younger, softer somehow. His hair was slightly messier, his smile unguarded in a way she had never seen. And he wasn't alone. Seated beside him was a woman, dark-haired, bright-eyed, laughing, and between them, perched happily on Caleb's lap, was a small boy, no older than 2, a boy with Caleb's unmistakable eyes. Elena's breath caught. Her hand trembled as she held the photograph, 1,000 unanswered questions spiraling in her mind, each one heavier than the last. Behind her, a voice broke the silence. Where did you find that she turned? The photo still in her hands. Caleb stood in the doorway, barefoot, the shadows of old memories darkening his face. I didn't mean to snoop, Elena said quickly. I couldn't sleep. It's okay, he said, his voice rough. It was bound to surface eventually. She looked down at the photo again, her throat tight. Is he... She began, but couldn't finish. Caleb walked closer, sat down beside her. His hands were steady, but his voice wavered. My son, he said quietly. His name was Caleb. 2. The name fell between them, heavier than anything she had prepared for. Elena blinked back the sting behind her eyes. I was 27, Caleb continued, his voice distant, as if telling someone else's story. Rachel and I weren't married yet. Life was a blur. Company launches, late-night investor meetings, 20-hour workdays, and then Caleb came. He smiled. A small, aching thing. He changed everything. He whispered. There was a long silence, where only the hum of the city filled the gaps. He had this way, Caleb said slowly, of grabbing my face with both his hands when I was distracted, like he was reminding me, hey, I'm right here. And every time I stopped, every time, Elena stayed quiet, letting his memories fill the room without interruption. I lost them both, Caleb said, his voice barely audible. In a car accident, a rainy Monday. Rachel was driving. I was supposed to be there too, but I canceled last minute for a meeting that got delayed anyway. His words shattered something inside her. Without thinking, Elena reached for his hand. He let her take it. I didn't talk about it. He said, not really. I buried myself in work, in plans, in control. Because if I controlled everything, maybe I wouldn't have to feel what I couldn't fix. He looked at her, then, really looked. And for the first time, Elena saw the boy he had once been, the man still learning how to carry all that hurt. And then, you showed up, he said softly. Coffee-stained resume, blazer sleeves too long, laughing at broken copy machines. A tear slipped down Elena's cheek. She didn't bother wiping it away. You reminded me, Caleb said, his voice breaking, how messy and beautiful life can be again. You didn't have to tell me this, Elena whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I wanted to, Caleb said, because I don't want to hide from you. Not anymore. Elena looked back at the photograph, at the little boy with Caleb's eyes and Rachel's laugh. Then she looked at the man beside her, this man who had lost so much and still dared to hope again. He would have loved you, Caleb said quietly, almost to himself. You both would have filled a room with laughter. I wish I could have met him, Elena whispered. Caleb squeezed her hand gently. You did, he said, his smile bittersweet. Every time you made me laugh again. They sat there, the city humming softly around them, 2 people carrying old ghosts, but choosing for the first time not to carry them alone. Caleb's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. but he smiled. "You would have been his favorite," he said, voice thick with certainty. They sat side by side in the soft hush of early morning, grief resting between them like something sacred, not something to fix, not something to outrun, something to carry together. And in that silence, Elena understood. This wasn't just about a man who had lost. This was about a man learning how to open his heart again, how to let love in, even when it came tangled with shadows, especially then. Later that morning, as the first beams of sunlight stretched cautiously across the floor, Elena placed the photograph carefully on the edge of Caleb's bookshelf, not to hide it, not to bury the past, but to honor it. When Caleb came into the room, coffee in hand, he paused at the sight of it. His gaze softened. "You sure?" he asked quietly. Elena nodded without hesitation. "He's part of you," she said simply, "and I love all your parts, even the ones that still hurt." Caleb set the coffee mug down and crossed the room without a word. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her into the solid, steady warmth of his chest. She sank into him, breathing in the faint scent of soap and cedar and something uniquely him. For a long moment, there were no words, only the quiet beat of two hearts, finding a rhythm together. Then, so softly it was almost lost in her hair, Caleb whispered, "I never thought I'd be brave enough to love again." Elena smiled against him. "Turns out you just needed someone messy enough to shake up your perfect life." And for the first time in years, Caleb Whitmore felt whole again. Not because the pain had vanished, but because it had finally found a place to rest. Session 10, the proposal that wasn't planned. Not every proposal needs a plan. Sometimes, all it takes is the right moment and the right person. The storm rolled in on a restless Thursday night. Rain battered the windows with impatient fingers. Wind howled between the towers of Manhattan, and in apartment 17C, the world shrank to the soft glow of candles and the sound of laughter. Elena was in the kitchen, barefoot, battling a lighter and a stubborn wick, determined to light as many candles as possible before the next power flicker. "I swear," she muttered, waving the lighter like a sword. "If we lose electricity while I'm baking, I'm throwing this cookie dough at the sky." Across the room, Caleb chuckled. He stood at the sink, sleeves rolled up, drying dishes with the kind of precise focus only he could bring to domestic life. "Don't tempt fate," he warned, smiling. "You're already baking during a thunderstorm. That's basically an invitation for chaos," says the man who alphabetizes his spice rack, Elena teased, grinning at him over her shoulder. "I believe in order," he said with mock seriousness. "I believe in chocolate," she shot back. The lights flickered once, twice, then surrendered entirely, leaving the apartment cloaked in the gentle, flickering light of Elena's stubborn candles and the golden spill of the storm-lit city beyond the windows. "Well," Elena said, planting her hands on her hips, romantic ambiance unlocked. "All we're missing is a power ballad and two badly timed confessions." Caleb dried his hands slowly, his smile fading into something quieter, something steadier. "You want a confession?" he asked, his voice low. Elena blinked, the humor slipping from her face at the intensity in his, "I was joking," she said, her voice unsteady. "I'm not." He stepped toward her, the candlelight catching in his hair, shadowing the strong lines of his face. There was a tremor to him, not fear exactly, but something raw and real. He stood in front of her now, close enough that she could feel the heat of him. "I was going to wait," he said, almost to himself. "I had a plan, a ring, a dinner reservation, a speech so rehearsed it could have passed federal regulations." Elena didn't breathe, didn't move. Caleb reached for her hands, holding them gently in his own. But then the power went out, he said, smiling that small, lopsided smile she loved so much, And I remembered something you once told me. She blinked, trying to remember through the rush of blood in her ears what that life doesn't wait for perfect. He whispered, it just shows up. Messy, unscripted, and if you blink too long, you miss it. Tears blurred her vision before he even finished speaking. So, Caleb said, his voice thick with everything he didn't know how to say, I'm not waiting. He reached into his pocket, but there was no box, no ring, just his hand, trembling slightly, and it meant more than diamonds ever could. Elena Brooks, he said. Her heart stuttered. I want to build something messy and real with you. I want to fight over stupid things and fall asleep laughing. I want to wake up and still choose you, every day, even when it's hard, especially then. Elena's tears slipped free, but she was smiling. Yes, she whispered before he even finished. Yes, Caleb Whitmore, yes. And there, surrounded by candlelight and storm winds, with no grand plan and no perfect timing, they built the beginning of forever. Caleb leaned against the door frame of his office one morning, remembering the way it all began, how he thought he needed a secretary, someone efficient, predictable, safe. What he found was a woman who rewired his soul. Elena sat curled on the couch, a blanket wrapped around her knees, laughing through tears as he said it aloud. You're terrible at metaphors, she teased gently. Wiping her cheeks, he smiled, a little sheepish, a little unsteady. I'm not perfect, he admitted. I've failed. I've been broken. I've built walls so high that even I forgot how to climb them. He crossed the room, every step heavy with something fragile and precious. But you, he said, voice thick with feeling. You laughed your way through every brick. You reminded me that I'm allowed to love again. And there, without ceremony, without planning, without even a ring, Caleb dropped to one knee. No script, no crowd, only candlelight flickering against storm-dark windows, and a girl who once spilled coffee on his lobby floor and changed everything. I don't have a ring tonight, Caleb whispered, searching her eyes. I'll get one, I promise. But I need to ask you this now because I can't imagine another storm, another sunrise, another anything without you in it. He exhaled shakily, heart laid bare between them. Elena Brooks, he said, will you marry me? The world stilled, the kind of silence that falls not with fear, but with awe, the breath held between the question and the answer that would shape everything. Elena dropped to her knees in front of him. Laughter caught in her throat, tears slipping freely down her cheeks. You don't need a ring, she whispered, voice trembling. You already gave me everything that matters. Caleb choked out a laugh, the relief breaking through him like sunlight. Is that a yes? He asked, his voice breaking. It's a hell yes, Elena said, her smile radiant through the tears. He pulled her close, their foreheads pressed together, both of them laughing and crying and shaking from the sheer impossible wonder of finding each other. When Caleb kissed her, no one watched, no one clapped, but the candles flickered softly around them, as if even they knew something sacred had just been sealed. Later that night, after the storm passed and the city blinked back to life, they sat together on the couch, wrapped in a shared blanket, watching the rain-speckled city below. You sure you don't want the fancy proposal? Caleb murmured against her hair. I could still plan something elaborate. Elena looked up at him, smiling softly. I got the real one, she said, and that's the one I'll tell our kids about. He chuckled, low and warm. Kids. Huh, eventually, she said, squeezing his hand. Caleb smiled back, heart overflowing with a future he never thought he'd have. I like the sound of that, he said, and just like that, in the quiet aftermath of a storm, a man who had once sworn off love became someone's forever. The vows, The chapter called us. They started as strangers, then a mistake, then a home. It was a crisp afternoon in the hills of upstate New York. The air was cool and golden, thick with the scent of cinnamon and fresh pine. Leaves fell from the trees like confetti, and everything smelled like new beginnings. The ceremony wasn't extravagant. Elena didn't want chandeliers or glittered rose petals. Caleb didn't want five-star venues or boardroom guests. They wanted real, so they chose a quiet vineyard tucked into the hills, surrounded by close friends, handwritten vows, and one guest of honor, sitting front row in pink silk and oversized sunglasses, Beatrice Whitmore. She watched Caleb beam at the altar, nudged Amanda beside her, and whispered, "Took him long enough." Amanda smiled, but worth every second. At the end of the aisle, Caleb waited in a deep charcoal suit, nervously adjusting his cufflinks, the very ones Elena had once gifted him, with a note tucked into the box that read, "In case you forget, this is your favorite shirt now." Then the music began, simple, slow. A string quartet humming a tune that sounded like a memory and a beginning all at once. And then Elena appeared. Her dress wasn't grand or opulent. It flowed around her like a secret she no longer needed to keep. Her hair was caught in soft waves. Her smile so bright, Caleb forgot how to breathe. When she reached him, neither of them spoke right away. They just stood there, two people who had been broken, lost, rebuilt, and somehow found each other. It was real. It was theirs. They stood beneath a wooden arch draped with wildflowers, hands intertwined, ready to start a story they would write together, a story called us. It was time for the vows. Caleb spoke first, his voice steady, but thick with emotion. "I never believed in second chances," he began, his gaze never leaving Elena's. "Not really. I believed in schedules, in logic, in leaving first before anything could break me again." A soft breeze carried his words across the vineyard, where every guest leaned forward, holding their breath. Caleb's eyes glistened, but his voice grew stronger. "Then you walked in," he said, smiling, carrying a coffee-stained resume and a mouth full of optimism I didn't know I needed. "You were chaos, pure and beautiful, and somehow, you were exactly what I had been waiting for." Laughter rippled through the crowd, light and warm. Caleb's voice dropped, low and certain. "You taught me that love doesn't fix what's broken. It doesn't erase the scars. It stands beside them. It laughs with them. It stays." He reached for her hand, squeezing gently. "I can't promise perfection," he said, his voice almost a whisper, "but I promise presence, even when it's hard, especially then." Tears shimmered in Elena's eyes as she squeezed his hand back. Then it was her turn. "I was never the girl who made plans," Elena said, her voice shaking but full of light. "I moved from apartment to apartment, from almost jobs to almost enoughs. I never had a map." She looked at Caleb, her whole heart shining through her smile, "until I walked into the wrong building." A soft wave of laughter floated through the guests. Elena laughed too, wiping a tear. "That day, I thought I was ridiculous, desperate, lost." She took a breath that steadied her. "But what I found was you." Her voice grew steadier with every word. "You let me be loud. You let me be messy. You laughed at my sticky notes and let me eat cereal for dinner. You let me belong." She paused, smiling through her tears. "And now, I want to belong to you." Their hands tightened together. Trembling and strong, they exchanged rings. A simple circle of gold and promises too deep for words. And then, without any grand fanfare, they kissed. No fireworks, no roaring applause, just warmth, just reverence, just Dolores Whitmore, whispering with a proud smile, "It's about time." The reception was exactly as they had dreamed, simple, joyful, and real. Long wooden tables stretched under the canopy of string lights. Place cards scribbled in Elena's looping handwriting. A cake she insisted on decorating herself. It leaned slightly to one side. Caleb called it perfect. They danced under the stars, moving slowly, laughing, stumbling a little, holding each other like two people who understood what it meant to survive storms and still choose music. Caleb twirled Elena once, then leaned close and whispered, "Remember when you said you couldn't dance?" She grinned up at him. "I still can't." She said, "I just found someone willing to dance with me anyway." And they moved, not with grace, but with joy, the kind of joy that doesn't need to be seen to be real. Later that night, Elena slipped off her shoes and sat on a quiet bench at the edge of the vineyard, watching the last of the guests mingle and laugh under the lights. Caleb found her there, sitting down beside her, taking her hand in his. "You tired, Mrs. Whitmore?" he asked, his voice soft with wonder. She smiled, resting her head against his shoulder. "I'm glowing," she whispered. "That's different." He kissed the top of her head. "So, what's next?" he asked. She looked at him, their future stretching wide and wild ahead of them. "We build the rest of the story," she said, "page by page," Caleb added, smiling. Messy margins, ink stains, sticky notes. They laughed quietly together, the stars coming out one by one above them, not loudly, but gently, like love that no longer needed to prove anything, only to exist. And they began again, not with promises of perfection, but with the simple, quiet vow that whatever came next, they would write it together. In the end, it wasn't the grand gestures that changed everything. It was the quiet things, a letter hidden in a drawer, a whispered promise in the dark, a girl who walked into the wrong building and stayed, a man who thought he'd lost everything and found everything he never knew he needed. Elena and Caleb's story reminds us that love isn't always loud. Sometimes it shows up in sticky notes and mismatched dinners, in shared silences and stolen glances, in second chances we never saw coming, because real love, the kind that endures storms, fears, and the ghosts of what could have been, isn't about perfection. It's about choosing each other. Every messy, beautiful, unplanned day. Thank you for joining us on this journey, a story about finding home, even when you didn't know you were lost. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who still believes in second chances, and subscribe to our channel for more tales of love, healing, and hope, because sometimes the best stories aren't the ones we plan, they're the ones that find us when we least expect it. See you in the next story.